I mean, yeah, Eneru was basically the Flash with an attitude, but being able to literally control someone? That's a yikes. Hello my fellow weebs and welcome back to the One Piece Saga, the series covering my never-ending journey of watching through One Piece for the very first time, giving my thoughts on it and ranking each arc in a tier list, to determine which is unquestionably, definitively, and definitely not just in my opinion, the best one. As per usual, if you have any questions regarding the formats, the first video in the series will likely answer it. And by the way, I do hope that it is back up by now, it might not be. And today, we do have an episode of quite a few special circumstances and exceptions. Firstly, being the first one back after the entire series was wiped off of YouTube by copyright strikes and giving me quite a few sleepless nights. But also due to the stories we'll be covering. Let us bring up the good old tier list and I'll talk about exactly what I mean. First and foremost, we are once again entering a new saga, which also means that it's time to switch up the arc name colors that we're using. So look out for this dark blue tint when we're talking about the Water 7 saga. Secondly, we have two filler arcs on the cards, but there is very little to talk about, so we will not be doing the usual in-depth dive and pretty much just moving straight onto the ranking. And lastly, as you may have noticed, the filler Foxy's return is split into two parts, and that is due to the fact that the second half of it is actually mostly canon, and so different from the first that I can't with a clear conscience lump them together, and as such, they'll be ranked separately. But without further ado, let us jump straight into our first arc of the day. Long Ring Long Land. First and foremost, this arc's name is very much in line with my overall thoughts on it, mostly it feeling very long. Though let's not get ahead of ourselves. The actual first thing I want to bring up is the HD upgrade. If you've been tagging along in my journey through One Piece, you will have heard me go on about CG, animation, cinematography, etc. a bunch already, but the jump to higher definition here was extremely noticeable. And I loved every bit of it. Aside from the fact that we have lost the unique mid-cards, which are now all replaced by the same one featuring Luffy. Yes, this is a very small detail to latch onto, but I do think that each character having their own little stinger was a nice touch that we've unfortunately lost. Though who knows, I guess it's entirely possible that they may return at some point, if not likely. As for the story, we open right on the heels of G8, with the Strawhats floating with the octopus and then splashing down again. And quick notes here, I obviously don't know whether the octopus is actually canon or not, but I like how quickly it was dealt with to avoid the whole "why don't they just use the octopus again" question that would soon be brought up. We basically see Chopper just make sure that it's okay, the crew says goodbye to it, and it's returned to the sea. Really not much else to say here, it's just a very neat way of dealing with such a plot device. Though what happens next still has me rattling my brain as we've heard nothing more about this yet. We cut to Bellamy, who we met in Jaya, and he is fighting his crewmates. Thing is, they aren't doing this out of their own volition. They are being controlled by Doflamingo, one of the warlords with a 300 million bounty. And by the way, the graphical fidelity here is once again a chef's kiss indeed. All the subtle shadows and extra details make this upgrade so nice. But anyway, this power has to be limited somehow, right? I mean, yeah, Eneru was basically the Flash with an attitude, but being able to literally control someone? That's a yikes. And yes, I do realize I've been saying this all the time already. But the thing that stood out to me the most was all the talk from Doflamingo about a new era being just around the corner. What's all this about only real pirates surviving, etc.? Is there some sort of scheme where these extremely notorious pirates are trying to bring on a new golden age like Roger did? Well, I've got no idea, but I am most certainly interested to see where this goes. Oh, and by the way, Bellamy's quote-unquote death very much gave me those Saga, it was very unclear vibes. Cutting back to the Straw Hats, we get another shot that made me note down just how big of a jump in animation this was, as we see this beautiful sunrise over the horizon. I promise I won't bring it up too much later, okay? But to cut a long story short, we arrive at a land where everything is very long. Get it? And if you'll indulge me in my own tales for a second, sadly, I am one of those very sad World of Warcraft players still waiting for content, and the long boy was a massive meme in the community a while back. So seeing these long boys all over the place certainly gave me a good chuckle. And it's here where we are introduced to the admittedly few characters that we see throughout this arc, those being the old Stilts guy and Foxy along with his crew. The Stilts guy's story, albeit bizarre, is fairly straightforward. He was trying to break the world record for the longest stilts and ended up being stuck in the sky for years. Meanwhile, his nomadic people left him in a loop around the islands that would take 27 years. The world-building elements of these islands being traversable only for a short period of time was certainly very interesting, though I found it very underutilized as it was just a background fact to set up this quote-unquote main problem. As for Foxy, we are introduced to the concept of a Davy Back Fight, a series of games with a wager of being able to steal one of the opposing team's crew. Luffy being Luffy, despite having absolutely no obligation to join the challenge, does, and so the game officially begins. And I gotta say, I absolutely loved the whole festival being thrown for the events and the lighthearted approach to the challenge. We're basically getting the obligatory sports game arc, but I am still waiting for a tournament arc One Piece. Though jokes aside, I do think the whole switch to this more fantasy and shenanigan-y vibe of these games coming up was a really welcome shift in tone. In story, however, we find out that these games have a lot of rules, or I guess you could call them very long rules, which the Strawhats obviously do not know. But the one in question is that Luffy can't participate in all the games, so now the very small crew of the Strawhats have to divvy up teams against the magnitudes larger crew of Foxy. This is of course where we start getting the whole Foxy cheating shtick. And I suppose we can talk about it now and not bring it up too much later. In short, at first I thought it was fun, then basically throw away information, then somewhat frustrating, and then just full-blown obnoxious. The thing with these sorts of cheating characters is that they have to be likable or at least interesting. For me, Foxy is neither one of those things. He is extremely one-note with his whole, "oh, they insulted me" shtick, and then just the blatant cheating. Speaking of which, I'm not sure of how much I enjoyed how basic the whole unfair premise was either. I get that it is because how openly they cheat that they are this powerful, but at the same time, it just got old. I would have loved for the cheating to be a little more low-key and the ref actually enforce it, but the Straw Hats would also try to find some exploits, etc. That way it would have been a little more nuanced, rather than the Straw Hats, who we've seen can pull some trickster moves as well, upholding this very just approach to the challenge, even though they are clearly going up against all odds. Again, the cheating isn't the problem here, it's the fact that it is so one-note throughout the entire tournament. But alright, enough about that. The first round, that being the donut race, was probably one of my favorites, largely due to everyone being involved. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the first time we see fishmen since Arlong Park? Well, either way, I am glad that we see them pop up every now and then. It just makes the world feel that much more real and alive. My favorite moments in this one for sure have to be the completely and utterly failed deceptions that ended up tricking Portia and her crew rather than the Straw Hats. And this is very much one of the arc's strong points. These sorts of comedic moments as a result of the absurdity of Foxy worked great, but again, they were so one-note that over time they just became old. And there is a small detail that I want to bring up, but I know is kinda dumb. I'm kinda sad that we didn't see them at least try to use the waiver. It's such a powerful thing that I'm kind of surprised it wasn't even brought up here. But okay, it was against the rules and the Straw Hats, so far at least, are playing by them. But at this point in the arc, we still hadn't really seen the extent of Foxy's power. That is, until the end of the race is in sight. Mostly thanks to Nami's maneuvering skills, the Straw Hats have an all but guaranteed victory when Foxy's Devil Fruit power is finally revealed, that being the Slow Beam. This was an interesting power that was leveraged surprisingly creatively by Foxy, though more on this later on. As a result of the race, Chopper is taken from the crew. And yes, this moment was most certainly a chef's kiss. Him screaming to Luffy was super emotional, and I loved how Zoro stepped in, realigning their sights on the true mission and saying that they themselves agreed to the game, and that no one in the pirate world would sympathize with his tears. Yeah, I just really like this sort of tough love from Zoro. Chopper takes the message on board, and we get back to the game. But despite this moment being really cool in one sense, in another, it removed Chopper from the entirety of this arc story. The only time we see him actually properly pop up is in the dodgeball round, and that was very short-lived too. If you recall what I've said from pretty much any of the high-ranking arcs, I absolutely love when each and every character gets their opportunity to shine, and here, that's just not the case. Anyway, the next match is a little cumbersome due to the rule of no replacements, meaning that instead of the team of 3 with Chopper being among them, Sanji and Zoro have to do this duo. Hello, editing Koroto here. Since you've made it this far already, I think you've probably noticed that the way I handle visuals has changed for quite obvious reasons. So do let me know how you think it is right now. I am seriously dating this video right now, but this entire thing was produced like a month ago already, but I basically had to redo it from scratch. Do you think the semi-dynamic pictures are enough, or do you think I can replace even more clips and just describe what's happening? Basically, any and all feedback is welcome. And with that being said, let us get back to the video. Considering how much they sort of hate each other, this was a very fun matchup and I enjoyed seeing their dynamic, especially once things got serious and they actually agreed to team up. It's also here where we get a moment that I would have loved to see more of. Nami steals the ref's whistle and cards, making it impossible for him to dish out any random penalties to the Straw Hats. And this is the sort of action I would have loved to see. Cheaters versus cheaters is a lot more fun to watch than fair versus not. When trickery is involved, anything goes. And that is, by default, more exciting, right? But the duo of Sanji and Zoro against all odds managed to win the second round, meaning the Straw Hats now get to pick someone from Foxy's crew. And here, we get a moment that I am very torn on. Luffy does not pick Chopper straight away. Throughout the entire series, we've seen how serious Luffy can get when it comes to his crew. Think Nami and Arlong Park, Vivi and Alabasta, etc. So him helping the Stilts guy over his own friend was sort of bizarre. Yeah, we know that the Straw Hats, generally speaking, help a lot of the people they meet, but still, the priority here was a tad weird if you ask me. Though we do get this absolutely brilliant shot of Luffy calling out the Chopper and promising to get him back. So yes, that was very good. And just before we move on, I've gotta say that despite me being absolutely sick of Foxy by the end of this arc, the announcer from his crew was absolutely on point right up until the very end. I think it was a perfect mix of in-universe comedy and actual commentary for us as the viewer as well. I think such characters can be very difficult to pull off without you becoming sick of them, since, as the announcer, they should be speaking 24/7. So I think me enjoying this commentary the whole way through does say a lot. The third round felt a bit random if I'm being honest, but I think there were still some interesting moments here. For example, the whole Sanji-Zoro dynamic gave me a good laugh as they argue about who's a coach and who's the manager, and then Robin doing some calculated risky plays to ensure their victory was also fun to see. And despite it seeming impossible at first, considering Luffy couldn't even stand up on the rollerblades, the Straw Hats managed to be victorious and get Chopper back. The shot of him just crying his heart out while running to Luffy gave me a good chuckle as well. But then we get what might just be the most, I don't even know what to call it at this point, but random thing to happen in the series. Luffy agrees to another Davy Back Fight. At this point, I was just plain confused as to why they'd go through the entire escapade again. But okay, the first, or I guess fourth round is dodgeball, which I am admittedly very biased to. You see, growing up in our school, and I honestly think this is just a thing where I lived, we played dodgeball with volleyballs. And let me tell you, when you get properly hit by it, they hurt bad. But we had this regular group of like 25 people split into 2 groups with 3 or 4 balls at a time, and it was just a blast. A meta developed where we figure out how to deal with specific players. I mean, there was a person whose throw was so strong that they actually made a dent in the gym's wall, but the game was absolutely glorious. Retrospectively though, what we did was very dangerous, to be honest. We had people breaking arms regularly. I too walked around with a cast for a few months. But yeah, dodgeball is a game that I absolutely adore, so seeing it in one piece was very fun. In story, however, the thing is that this round ends in defeat for the Strawhats. And based on what she did in the rollerblading round, Foxy picks Robin. So once again, we have lost a crewmate. Round 2 of Game 2 is a game of red light, green light, and I honestly found this one very boring, so we will just skip past it. But by some shenanigans, the Strawhats lose again and Chopper is picked. There is a great moment here though, of Luffy realizing he may have just lost at least one crew member forever, which again just made me go back to the question of why did they agree to it in the first place. Thankfully, we have Nami, who manages to negotiate an all or nothing type of deal, meaning that if Luffy wins the final round, we'll be good. And now, we arrive at what most certainly is the highlight of the entire arc for me, the boxing match. First and foremost, the bombastic and theatrical 80s vibe was perfect and really gave me those old school Rocky vibes. And of course, I have to bring up Luffy's afro power. Though I do think that in some ways this can be seen as a little problematic in the modern context, as there is a fair bit of stereotyping going on. I'm definitely not smart enough to talk about that, so I'll just leave that to you. It's just something that I wanted to bring up, as it's one of those things that I think is definitely worth thinking about, especially in media, similarly to what we talked about with Sanji and Alabasta. But yeah, the entire fight was certainly the, albeit overcooked, highlight of the arc. I think if the Foxy shtick hadn't been played out to death, his disguise might have landed better for me in terms of comedy, but I was already somewhat turned out of his antics. Though I was surprised that he managed to be deceptively powerful with his slow beam, very much leveraging his knowledge of the ship to beat Luffy for a good part of the fight. And there is the great scene of Luffy saying that he won't let him have a single member of his crew, even if it cost him his life, which was very much deserving of the chef's kiss. But on the flip side, it had me once again scratching my head as to why he didn't pick Chopper in the first game, and why he even agreed to the second one. Sure, it's not a big deal, but it does still feel a little bit weird. Luffy manages to finally beat Foxy, and so is now entitled to 500 members of his crew. The shot of Chopper again running to him gave me a good laugh, but what may have been even more perfect is how Luffy takes their sails and paints them new ones. A chef's kiss indeed. And right on the heels of that, we have Luffy accepting all of them on the crew, and then just being like, "Okay, you're off the crew now." Just how matter of fact he was about the whole thing was absolutely on point. So, with the games wrapped up and the crew back together, the Straw Hats go to say goodbye to the old stilts guy, but are surprised when a, I guess not surprisingly, very long mole being piloted by a random boy shows up. Thing is, this is the old stilts guy grandson who, just like him, wanted to break the world record for the longest underground holes. Yeah, this one did feel a little jammed in, and frankly came out of nowhere, but it was a nice conclusion to his story, I guess. But with that, we drop sail and leave the island in search of a shipwright. And that's Long Ring Longland. I think by this point you can tell that my thoughts on this one are quite mixed. Most of it coming down to the fact that, as the name implies, it was just too long. But just before we get to the rating, I talked so much about the HD upgrade and how crisp it looked, and why don't we get our own HD upgrade, right? So I'm happy to introduce the new and updated tier list. I don't know about you, but I think it looks a lot more crisp. So with that being said, for me, this was a super 5 out of 10 arc, and thus the ranking is straight in the middle of the C tier. It's definitely a fun one. I was very excited by the prospect of this sort of sports games arc, but sadly, as time went on, it just went off the rails for me. But with that being said, let us jump into Ocean's Dream. And as I said in the intro, we'll be making sort of an exception for this arc, as there's honestly not too much to talk about. For those of you who have not watched it, all you need to know for what we'll be talking about is the premise. That being the Strawhats losing their memories and reverting back to how they were before they joined up with the Strawhats. Think Nami denouncing pirates, Chopper hiding behind corners, etc. And the thing is, this sort of premise was absolutely fascinating to see. The problem is that it falls short of that premise in every single way. Nor the cause or the solution is the least bit interesting. We just had an arc that was, in my opinion, way too long. Well, conversely, this one was way too short to be interesting. If a full-fledged narrative were to be told where the Straw Hats must relearn to work together, thus reminding us of just how far they've matured and developed, I honestly think it could have been one of the most interesting stories that could have been told, especially the further you get into the series. There is a very good reason why things like Spider-Man can be endlessly rebooted yet still have an audience. When we know that we like something, that what if question is interesting by default. So I think if it were to be expanded on in a series like One Piece, it could be brilliant. Obviously don't go overboard, but just like a brief look into what could have been would be awesome. The only problem I can see in such a narrative is that by default it is filler. That is to say, due to the very nature of the what if, the actual plot cannot really move forward. Though at the same time, I think even that can be elegantly woven into the narrative and indirectly moving the overall plot forward. Obviously we're talking very broadly here, but I hope you get what I'm saying. So yeah, the whole spooky vibe at the start had me very excited as it was around Halloween when I watched it, but everything else just fell flat. And yeah, that is Ocean's Dream. If I've come off overly negative on this one, it is because of how disappointing it turned out to be. But I think even if you hate the very idea of filler, I'd recommend watching this one for the premise alone. I think there's so much that could have been done with it. And because of how short it fell of that, I just have to put it as a very low E. Again, not because it's bad, it's not, but because it's very disappointing. But alright, let us jump into the final arc of the day. Foxy's Return. First things first, once again, if you recall what I said in the intro, we've got more exceptions here, as this arc was only half-ish filler according to the guide I was using. And yes, this caught me by surprise as I was very confused why such major reveals are happening in filler arcs, only to find out that half of it isn't actually filler. But yeah, let's get into it. The first scenes of this arc were already very sus, as instead of seeing the Straw Hats like we usually do, we saw the Marines talking about contacting the 5 Elder Stars. And then we see this random guy riding a bike on the sea. Needless to say, a quite puzzling introduction to the arc, that's for sure. Though cutting to the Straw Hats, they run into what's left of Foxy's crew who are struggling to live through the intense storm. They allow them to stay on the ship for a while, feed them, and most importantly for Portia, spend time with Chopper, who is obviously hidden to avoid her. The next morning, the Foxy ship appears on the horizon and him along with Hamburg and Portia return to their ship. And as soon as they leave, we get this wonderful moment of Robin giving Chopper a secret knock and then a secret phrase of sodium hydrogen phosphate. I don't know why, but their friendship has really begun to grow on me. More on this later, keep this in mind. As for Foxy, long story short, we basically find out that they really aren't Foxy pirates anymore and he has to fight the new captain, but he ends up tricking the Strawhats and actually capturing them. I'll be honest, I did not care much for this at all. I just wanted to see the whole Foxy arc over and dealt with, so the entire battle and all the twists and turns was honestly a meh for me. Though on the ship, Robin and Chopper stay behind and are just chilling while playing a board game. Seriously, I don't know what it is, but they are so wholesome. Again, keep this in mind for now. As for Foxy, his story is basically wrapped up with him taking back his crew, but trying to chase down the Strawhats since they are still flying the exquisitely painted sails by Luffy. So I guess he is bound to return at some point, which is not a bad thing. I just hope that it is done in a while and not so dragged out as in the case of Long Ring Longlands. Once the Straw Hats make landfall, we get yet another brilliant interaction between Chopper and Robin, as he tells her to go get some food before it's gone. Robin responds by saying that she'll find a stopping spot in the book. But Chopper, in the most matter-of-fact fashion possible, just says, "No, if you're always reading, you'll become a worm." They call it a bookworm, right? Yes, this was a very stupid joke, but if Zoro is my favorite character, then these two are most certainly my favorite duo. Every single one of their interactions is just nice to see. I guess you could read into it and say that they are the two newest Straw Hats and that's why they've bonded so much. But either way, there's a feeling of genuine friendship between them, and that is just wholesome. Though this peaceful respite is interrupted once we come across Admiral Aokiji, at the sight of whom Robin basically has a full-on panic attack. She proceeds to explain that he is one of the only 3 known world government's quote-unquote powerhouses, and that they have history. We find out that he is not here to fight or capture any of them. His only goal is to confirm Robin's location. And following this point, we are basically blasted with so many details that my brain, which expected filler, was nearly melted. Firstly, we find out that his power is to freeze water and everything in it, seemingly on a mass scale, essentially eliminating the only balancing force of water straight away. A devil fruit power user who is not only immune to the curse of the fruits, but can control it? That's a yikes. And as if that wasn't enough, we get the very ambiguous phrase of, "You're just like your Gramps, Monkey D. Luffy." So this guy has history with him as well? And perhaps even more importantly, Aokiji warns the Straw Hats that every single group that Robin has ever been a part of is no longer around. Thing is, we don't really know her backstory like we know the other Straw Hats, right? But I'm calling it right now. If she ends up splitting off of the group, I will be very, very sad, as again, her dynamic with Chopper is just wonderful. But this strikes a nerve, and Robin starts a fight with him, and in short, the Straw Hats are taken out in a matter of seconds, one after another. Sheesh. Was this a good reminder that even after characters like Arlong, Crocodile, and Eneru, they are still very, very insignificant in this world? And even after Luffy is straight up frozen solid and everyone else has run off, Aokiji still warns him about Robin. I have no idea what this is supposed to mean, but again, do not remove her from the story, thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, the scene of poor old Chopper crying trying to save her was a chef's kiss. Finally, Aokiji says that he'll leave Luffy alive, but tells him to cancel the debt about Crocodile and something to do with Smoker. Okay, like, Is this supposed to make my head spin or what? What's up with all of these cryptic messages? He just straight up leaves and that's that. The dude just blasted the entire crew without breaking a sweat, said some vague things to make my theory-making brain fry itself, and then left.
Bruh.
We get a very brief time skip as the Straw Hats recover, and we get this cool narration from Nami to catch us up on the events. And I suppose now would be as good of a time as any to bring up the concept of time skips in a world like One Piece. We were just shown that there are still characters out there for whom the Straw Hats are absolutely nothing in terms of power. So might we just see a time skip that would put them closer together in terms of power? Obviously do not answer this question, but maybe some sort of training arc for each of the crew might happen at some point, or we skip over like 9 months, maybe a year, maybe 2. I have no clue how that would play out in the narrative, as so far we haven't really had a location where we just chill out for a bit. But it is certainly something that I'd love to see, and this little narration, which you would usually see post time skip, just made me think of that. But with the Straw Hats being the Straw Hats, we see them just laugh at Luffy's impression how he looked frozen. You know, casually laughing about almost dying. But now, it's full sail toward the next island that the log pose is pointing to, which, because of Aokiji, we know is Water 7. Though it's not smooth sailing just yet, as they hear a train signal, and the train is about to hit them? Yeah, I don't know what this arc turned out to be, that's for sure. But I guess we are on our way to the next big adventure. And that's Foxy's return. Most certainly an all over the place arc in terms of importance, which is exactly why I split it into 2 parts. The first one, the filler, felt very pointless in the sense that I just don't see why we needed to see what happened to him afterwards. I kinda just took it as him reuniting with his crew sooner or later anyway. So with that being said, the first half of this arc will be a very low E, just above Ocean's Dream. Honestly, depending on the day, I might put it below Ocean's Dream, but again, that arc was such a disappointment that I'm just a bit salty. The other half of the arc, however, left me very intrigued, with so many ambiguous details that I had to slurp down my morning coffee just to get a grip of what's going on. But since there is so little of it in terms of runtime, I don't think I can reasonably rank it any higher than a middle-of-the-road C. Though the world-building elements and intrigue that was brought up here was plain awesome, and most certainly made me excited to see where this saga would lead us next. And on that note, next stop, the city Water 7. And that's the video. This one really turned out to be full of external and internal exceptions and whatnot, but I'm glad to be getting back to the series, that's for sure. As usual, a massive thank you to our current patrons, especially with what just happened, who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And a very warm welcomes to our newest supporters, Darren Weber and Voidseeker. Thank you. And just as a side note, I'm working on getting the entire backlog of the One Piece saga on Patreon as well, just in case this sort of thing happens again. That will take some time as I need to get the original renders back first, but patrons do keep an eye on there. And if you wish to join the highly coveted Mystery Shack Insiders Club, you can do so for as little as $1 per month. And last but not least, let us do the usual thing to see how many of you have stuck around until the very end. Leave a comment, whatever it may be, and include the word festive. Yes, it is already that time. Other than that, if you enjoyed the video, click all the YouTube buttons to let the algorithm know. But now, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.